Thank you for joining us for our next session, number 13. We are going to talk about disrupting writing and center students with Tiana and Trisha. And without further ado, please see Tiana and Trisha.
Thanks, Jackie. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ed Collab gathering this April, and we're so excited to be here. I'm Trisha Barbia, and I am a high school English teacher in southeastern Pennsylvania. I am also an Ed Collab literacy consultant and a co-founder of Disrupt Text and a National Writing Project Fellow. And in 2016 to 18, I was also lucky enough to be a Heinemann Fellow, which is where I met my lovely friend, Tiana Silvas, who will now introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Tiana Silvas. Thanks for joining us. I'm a fifth grade teacher in New York City, been teaching in New York City my entire career. And like Trisha said, Heinemann Fellow, lucky place to have met her, along with everybody else there.
Yes. So today we are going to get started. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. We have a bazillion slides to get through, so bear with us. So hopefully everyone can see that. Tiana, does that look good?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. All right. So again, we're going to be disrupting writing to center students. And I thought we'd start with this wonderful quote by Milton O'Keefe in the book called The Teacher You Want to Be. And I think when we think about our practices, we always have to think about the ways in which our practices are grounded in our beliefs, but we don't spend a lot of time thinking about what those beliefs are, which can actually be really dangerous because we are constantly acting on them, even if we're not aware. So again, our beliefs as teachers really matter. They serve as a catalyst for or the limitation of professional growth and change. And most importantly, the beliefs we hold as teachers shape the beliefs children take up about themselves as learners, their learning process, and the world around them. So we have to think about, when we're thinking about disrupting writing, we think about why do we write? What are our beliefs about the value and purpose of writing? And just two things that we'll share here from Margaret Mead, that a wonderful quote that I've always loved: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And writing is a way to do that. And writing is power. Writing gives us power to change the world. Writing is also a creative act. Here's Paulo Freire. The teacher is, of course, an artist, but being an artist does not mean that he or she can make the profile, can shape the students. What the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves. And so it is in the act of creative writing, through writing, that students are able to create themselves. So our beliefs matter. And given that, and starting there as our foundation, we just wanted to pause just for a moment and ask everyone who might be watching this now live with us or watching this at home at a later time, what are your beliefs about teaching writing? What do you believe are best practices to help students grow as writers? And then go back and think, what has informed these beliefs? What personal or classroom experiences, what people, what research? So if you just I'll put my timer on for just maybe 30 seconds. If you're following us via Twitter, if you want to, write down or jot down some notes and share them with the Twitterverse, great. Or if you just want to do it in your notebook, that'd be wonderful. All right, and here we go. So we're going to talk about disrupting writing. And in thinking about how we were going to organize this session today, Tiana and I thought we could think about 5 different areas that could use some disruption when it comes to our writing. And so thinking about how can we disrupt the genre, content, methods, audience, and assessment. So the first one we're going to tackle is genre. And when we think about genre, the first thing that we often think about is the 5-paragraph essay. Tiana, you're laughing. Why are you laughing?
I feel like this thing always comes up. I think a few people on Twitter actually, was it a couple of days ago when you put that out?
Yep.
I think it came out quite a bit and it was liked. not that the 5-paragraph essay is liked, but like everybody was like, we need to talk about the 5-paragraph essay.
Right. Yes. Exactly. And so when we think about writing in the world, or when we think about like what we're doing, we're teaching writing, the 5-paragraph essay doesn't really exist in the world. So it's the only place it really exists and really has quote unquote life. And I say quote unquote because it's like a lifeless form, is in schools. And so when we think about genre and we think about what genres we're teaching, we have to think about like, to what extent are the quote unquote genres we're teaching really just these inauthentic academic tasks that are not really authentic writing, but what John Warner says in his book, Why They Can't Write, but imitations of writing, right? And how can we possibly think about having kids change the world when we're constantly telling them how to think? Mm-hmm. And I love this idea that, you know, when I think about the 5-paragraph essay and I think about many templates and scaffolds, like, yes, these are great scaffolds, but scaffolds are meant to be taken away, right? They're not the goal. And template writing just leads to template thinking. And this graphic here that I have up on the screen right now about teaching leading to deep understanding is from a book called Making Thinking Visible. And this, I read it a few years ago, but just this one passage really stood out to me and really changed the way I think about anything that I do in the classroom. Is what I'm doing authentic to what happens in the world? Are the things that my students are doing, things that people do out in the world? Is it what I do in this activity when I'm out in the world? And is it what people in this discipline do out in the world? And if there's a disconnection, then it means we're just doing like academic tasks and not really anything authentic and real. And so again, like thinking about how we can disrupt writing and thinking about, you know, traditional academic research papers. Students can learn how to research in many ways. The traditional research paper is not the only way to learn research skills. Citation style, if most of our reading and writing is done online, then why are we not also teaching students how to do hyperlinks? And how often do we allow high stakes academic writing colonize all other spaces for writing in our classrooms? I understand, and I know Tiana knows as well. I think, Tiana, you said you just finished testing, right? Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, my son is actually, they're starting testing this week. Okay. So that's real, but in what ways do we let that colonize all other aspects of writing instruction?
Right, exactly. And it's also like thinking about this, just going back to how it's like forcing this like conformity and compliance with students where our experiences and our linguistic backgrounds don't necessarily fit into that structure or that strict format. I said this the other day to a couple of colleagues. I was like, test writing kind of kills the writer. Mm-hmm. And it hurts saying that, but I was like, it really kills the writer. Like we spend all this time like nurturing the voice and introducing students to so many different aspects of writing. And then all of a sudden, like they get to this component of the reality of testing in the world. And then it's just like, you know.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, Tiana, you had this great thing to share from one of your students about template writing, right?
Yeah. One of my students, in one of her reflections, she wrote this, and we had this conversation of like, life doesn't happen over the course of like a formula or a specific structure. And she says it better than me. I don't do this justice, but she was like, 1, introduction; 2, state the claim. Students shouldn't have homework. 3, specific reasons. 4, example from the text. 5, evidence from this text. And 6, conclusion. Stating the claim and reasons, nothing more. I mean, if you're a teacher and know this formula, you probably are chuckling right now. I love how she says that, like, when she says, like, she questions, like, does Jason Reynolds follow somebody else's rules? And I think what's really important for us to really hear as teachers is when the student says, I created a space for myself where I can write about what matters in my life and study mentors to develop my own structure. And she goes on to say, it's about finding my own structure within my voice. And that really resonates for me as a teacher. And I always have to like constantly go back to that. Yeah. So as we think about genre and we think about our units of study, we always have to think about centering the student. And how do we do this is by thinking about how genre can be flexible. A couple things that I always try to like make sure that are in the classroom is to make sure that kids have time to just write across the year. And it's not like I'm writing for an assignment or I'm writing to research or because whatever, but that they just have time to write. And really observing about what students like, how students are writing and what they're writing about, but also through their talk. And then help students like name their style. I think often like what happens in writing instruction is we try to show them a style or show them a form or a structure, and that often can backfire on us. And we don't have students present their full selves. So it's like sitting down with students and like helping them say like, hey, do you know what you did here? And noticing what they're doing naturally as a writer within whatever natural genre that they have that they're bringing to the table. And then always, as we think flexibly about genre, providing experiences that are inclusive and affirm the students in the classroom.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, Tiana, you and I were talking yesterday when we were preparing for this, how when we think about genre, we have these like walls around the idea of genre. Like, now we're going to do narrative and now we're going to do persuasive. When really, if out in the world, genre is much messier than that. Like when kids are writing, they're writing narrative and they're making an argument and they're writing informationally. Like they're doing all these things at once. And we have to lead with purpose rather than just thinking in terms of genre.
Right. And it can be confusing for kids. Like, wait, what do you mean? I can't use figurative language in this genre? No, like you can use that throughout every single thing that you're writing.
Right.
And our purpose is to like make sure that skills are transferring and like students own it. And I love how you said like it's messy. It's not transparent.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't teach it in this like one unit this way, one unit this way, one unit this way.
Right. Okay. All right. I think next we're going to be looking at content. Is that right? I think. Okay. Let me go back and share the screen. And here we go. Oh, no, I have one more. This is probably one of the most important slides here, which is that, you know, at the end of the day, writing instruction is not neutral. When we start making rules about what is a genre, then we start making we start defining the world for kids in ways that could be highly problematic. So we have to always think about the assumptions and values that we perpetuate when we insist on correct genres or correct forms of writing, including the 5-paragraph essay. And the other day when I asked for feedback on what needs to be disrupted in writing, I love what Anthony says right here. And I'll just read a little bit. But forcing students to write exclusively to the white gaze leads to many of the problems in writing instruction, including the 5-paragraph essay, including, you know, quote unquote, correct grammar. And of course, the lack of agency students have about writing about topics that are actually meaningful to them. And so, you know, nothing is really neutral. You know, I think we sometimes think, well, I'm just teaching what the book tells me to or what the lesson plan calls for. But I think we always have to investigate like what ideologies are behind some of those instructional moves that we're told to make, and whose linguistic and cultural biases are being perpetuated when we make those decisions, or allow those decisions to be made for us from above, even when they're wrong. Okay, so let's go to content. So how can we disrupt our content? And so one thing to ask ourselves when we think about writing content is about the mentor text that we use and who's writing and which writers do we hold up as mentors in our classroom, and in what ways the mentor texts we use reflect a wide variety of cultural and linguistic styles. I think one of my biggest mistakes when I first started teaching was I would write examples for my students because I knew that learning from models was really important, right? So at least I got that part of my, you know, teacher education program. But what I was doing was just basically teaching them how to write like me, right? Like I was just teaching them how to write in the way that I had been colonized to write. And instead, I wasn't really looking out and reaching for what writing looks like in the world and looking at a variety of cultural and linguistic patterns. And the content that we do show and share with kids tells them what's acceptable or not acceptable. And Tiana is going to take it from here.
Yeah, going back to what you just said is like how you were colonized to write. I think it's interesting how often kids and students, and even myself in my schooling, is I spent a whole lot of time trying to figure out how to write what they wanted to hear and the way they wanted to hear it. And I felt like I lost precious moments as a student and even into my teaching career until finally a door was opened and I was able to like break through that silence. So thanks for bringing that up, Trisha.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we can go back to choosing writing mentors, that
Yep.
little, yeah, that'd be great.
There you go.
So when we're planning, when I plan units or map out units, because it's interesting how units just start like developing on their own sometimes. I think it's really important that we think about who we teach first. And Trisha mentioned some of this. What languages that do students speak? What have students experienced outside of school? What are students interested in? What voices are missing? What ways of communicating are privileged? What perspectives are missing or that are needed? We really need to consider all these questions and be reflective so that we are choosing mentors that not only affirm but open windows for our students. And then we move to like what we teach, like the genre and the skills, and then like thinking about what mentors would students benefit from. Like, is that like a whole, like the whole text, or is it a part of a text as we're teaching? So the next slide just kind of shows an example from the book, The Diary from Here to There by Amada Irma Torres. And you can see that's in English and Spanish. And often it's like, I remember having a kid quite some time ago asking, like, it was asking permission to write in their native language. And I was like, yeah, of course you can. But that was like really like good feedback for me because I obviously wasn't being transparent in instruction where kids could feel or see that opening. And I think about to even, again, being a Mexican American student in the United States. And when I was little, I didn't have that exposure when I was learning to write that sounded like my house, like sounded like my family. And this text I just use sometimes to show students like just how we can bring in our linguistic experiences and backgrounds into our writing. And I think it's just really important how mentors can also open different windows for kids because if we look at Nikki Grimes's poetry book and the students were studying both Langston Hughes's work and Nikki Grimes's work, and as they were developing their own work, I remember this particular student was so focused on making sure that her mentor guided her work, and she just wouldn't let up until it was like in the right place that was reflective of Langston Hughes and Nikki Grimes. So, yeah. And this is a quote from Gloria Anzandula. I just find this like, I always go back. I have it written in my writer's notebook. To write, to be a writer, I have to trust and believe in myself as a speaker, as a voice for the images. I have to believe that I can communicate with these images and words and that I can do it well. A lack of belief in my creative self is a lack of belief in my total self and vice versa. I cannot separate my writing from any part of my life. It's all one.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And it reminds me, we were talking earlier about how, you know, when we think about curriculum and content in terms of what we're teaching, I mean, we're teaching kids and kids' lives. And that's the content and curriculum that we should be really focused on rather than whatever standard it talks about in some book that some people who've never been in a classroom have decided was right. Yeah. I wanted to throw this in here also. I teach high school, but picture books are for everyone, and they're definitely for high school. So you can see here when we think, you know, I cannot say enough about how as high school teachers we really limit ourselves by thinking that certain books aren't. I hate the word rigor, but you know what I mean. Like they're not rigorous enough for high school, and rigor. I always go back to what Kylene Beer says. Rigor is not inherent in any text. It's what you do with a text that matters. That's what makes an experience rigorous. And you know, no matter what the text complexity of any book might be, when we're looking for mentor texts, it's not going to matter if kids aren't reading them and they're not doing anything with them, right? So this is just a quick picture of some mentor texts, some picture books that I think are just wonderful that could be used in the high school classroom, and many of them that I have used myself to inspire all sorts of beautiful writing. If you don't know Minley's Drawn Together, especially, that always makes me cry, that book. And I've had students, especially if you have students who come from multi-generational families and have relationship with grandparents, that book inspires such beautiful, vulnerable writing. Also teaching kids how to, when we think about content, how to keep a folder of content that's meaningful for them, right? And think about mentor texts that are useful for them. We borrow the ideas of a swipe folder from Austin Kleon, Steal Like an Artist. So kids are able to pull in, when they see like little bits of writing here and there from the world that they think that they might want to try out for themselves, they can create that they're creating a content library of places to go back when they need inspiration to write. And of course, what are the mentor texts we see in the world? These three things are just three pieces of writing that are out there in the world that my kids wrote to or were inspired to write from. So I'm teaching The Great Gatsby right now, and we've been talking a lot about music, and we're watching, of course, the Baz Luhrmann film. And so we've been thinking a lot about the ways in which music can illuminate different scenes and different texts, and doing like sort of side-by-side text analysis of song lyrics with the text in the book. And one of our culminating writing experiences after The Great Gatsby is to come up with, thinking about new songs. What would a new soundtrack look like? But really looking at the lyrics and doing text analysis that way, and having this wonderful mentor text from the New York Times that came out just a few weeks ago, the top 25 songs that matter right now. Beautiful mentor text there. This other text here, it's possible leggings are the future, deal with it. My students literally just yesterday were writing letters back to this woman at Notre Dame who had written about leggings and how she was not a fan of them for a few different reasons. And my students really took to that and decided to write letters, like how would they respond back? And I've never seen them more engaged in a writing experience than when it's something that's an issue that seems meaningful for them. And then this last one, if you ever have a chance to go to thereluctantfather.com, it is a beautiful visual essay, a beautiful mentor text for how to use images and words side by side. And my students used this earlier as their mentor text for visual essays of their own that they were able to use Microsoft Sway, that's an online tool, to create their own visual essays that turned out to be much more effective in communicating what they felt and believed than just simply having something written down and typed up on a Microsoft Word document.
Yeah, Trisha, what I love about that is that it's just like giving so many pathways for so many different ways of knowing.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right. So methods. So here we go.
Yes. So when we think about our methods, this is like what I love to do before a unit or after or during a unit and even after a unit, is like taking out that plan and like also spying on myself during the process and like kind of using this circular representation and taking tally marks of when are these things happening throughout the teaching of writing. And it's a little bit of a classroom audit because when I do this, sometimes I notice that a lot of my stuff could be direct teaching. And when we talk about disrupting writing, what we want to do is we want to think about flipping it, and it shouldn't be necessarily always teacher directed, but flipping that to more student directed and student led. And sometimes it's hard to see because when we're in it, we're passionate about what we're doing. So like taking that moment back and like looking at our plan or in the unit and like just auditing ourselves so we can actually see that visual of like, how much do students really have ownership of this? So going forward, as we're shifting from the teacher to the students, like it's really important to just listen to what your students need and what they want as part of their writing workshop. Build toolkits and promote collaboration.
And Tiana, I think here you're going to share a few.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the toolkit thing, I always get a question. My writing workshop, fifth grade writing workshop, I've done it as low as like fourth grade too. It's hard to run a student-led workshop without the students having all their tools accessible to them, because then you're in this situation where it's like, oh, I need help, and you have like 10 million kids like trying to come up to you, and there's only one of you in the room, and then it's just not successful. So you probably can't see, this is actually pretty used. This kid like looks like he ate his. This is one of the kids writing toolkits, and in it, and it's very similar to what Trisha did. Like they have their goal setting section and their feedback section, and then a whole bunch of mentors, like all different kinds of mentors, like even have visual mentors, like visual essays that Trisha was talking about, just tons of them, and they're like annotated, and then just all their writing tools so that if they're stuck on something, and they're not genre specific, because going back to what we said earlier, that they could use any of these revision strategies across genres. And we use the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project curriculum, so we use their checklist to help guide some of their work. But these are like super essential to a student run workshop. And it's really easy to like differentiate your students' learning, because even this is another child's, but their mentors look very different. Like they're more pictorial. Again, that's also like highlighting and making sure that we are engaging students on their best way of knowing. So if we can go back.
Yeah, I love the way you said that, engaging children with their best way of knowing. That's such, I just love that expression, because I think too often it's not their best way of knowing, it's our preferred way of knowing and all the assumptions that go with that.
Yeah. So when you're like going to release your workshop, like I find it really helpful to look at it in like this like linear phase of like plan, coach, and release. Always like asking, so Trisha, can you switch that slide? Yeah. Sorry. Just ask the students, it's like, how do you feel about your writing process? I mean, some kids are going to be like, yeah. And then some kids are going to be like this. But we need to know like why a kid is feeling what they're feeling. And then most importantly, like how can we support you more as a writer? So it's not like, how can I support you more as a writer? How can we as a community of writers support you? And then what do you specifically want to work on and why? And just, I mean, this is very low tech here, but like having the kids just sign up for like whatever they need to sign up for, so that they're actually taking charge of what they need, versus again, like me saying, hey, I really think that you should be in this small group. I think kids become more meta about their writing process, and there's definitely more ownership and agency doing that. So that's like one thing, is like getting to know what like the kids want out of their workshop. And then the most important part is planning with students. So not planning for students, because that's that top-down approach, and we want to like switch that, and we want to plan with students. And so it's like sitting down with a student, just like you would sit down with colleagues, and like talking through like, what are you going to teach to your small group today? Like, how are you going to teach it? Like on the kid level, like what are your methods you're going to use? What charts do you need? What do you need to do this? And really just sitting down and planning with them and doing some rehearsal with them and like role playing, so that when they do get their small group, they're ready to go. And then last but not least, I mean, the planning stage does take some time. Last but not least is that release, which is my favorite part. Just to be able to stand back as a teacher and watch it all happen. We're not the center, and just there's these little small groups in the classroom going on. What's cool about it is there's like 5 different lessons going on in the room. And then you can just observe, and then also coach if needed, just like you would in a conference or whatever. And then I think the final stage of that is always reflect with the student who's teaching the writing, to see where they are and how they feel about it, and like what they did well and what they would change if they wanted to change anything. And then also as a teacher, like getting that feedback from your entire class of like, how did that feel for you? And moving forward in your writing workshop.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, it reminds me so much, Tiana, of what Ellen has told us, Ellen Keene, about kid watching, and that being so valuable.
Oh yeah. And kids are so honest.
Yeah.
I think during one of my reflections, I mean, I'm just going to say it, one of my kids was like, yeah, I learned so much more. I learned so much more from that workshop than I did from you. I was like, great, thanks. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Right. And so for those of you who are watching who are middle or high school teachers and think that workshop is just something for or middle or elementary school, I will tell you that workshop is probably one of the most empowering things for high school students. And for me as a high school teacher, it has probably been the biggest shifts in my own instruction about how I can bring writing workshop to my 43-minute class period to teach that I use to teach reading and writing. Although everyone is a reading and writing teacher across all disciplines. I know it falls to us as English teachers. So what does an immersive writing workshop look like at high school? And I will say that my students write in their notebooks all the time. That is like a key component of everything that we do every single day. But there are moments during the school year where we immerse ourselves in a writing workshop, where students like Tiana's really just take over and take ownership. And so I ask students to think about 3 questions when we go into like a dedicated period of time. And sometimes it's anywhere from 2 to 4, sometimes even 5 weeks of workshop time. And 3 questions that drive their learning. You know, what is this class asking you to learn? In other words, what's your purpose in learning here? So we think about like, this is a class about X, Y, or Z, or this is a unit about X, Y, or Z. Like, what is it we're trying to learn? And then the second question is, how will you do that learning as a student? And then how you'll demonstrate that learning to yourself and to others. So kids will create a sort of plan, individualized plan for themselves. So some students might say that, oh, I really need to work on my word choice because I feel like that is a place where I always fall flat. Or I need to work on better organizing my ideas because sometimes I'm just all over the place, or whatever it might be. And you can kind of see in this picture, I have these huge charts that we put up during each week, and every day kids sign in and say like, this is what I'm working on. Here's how I'm becoming a better reader or writer. And it really is up to the student. So the student comes in, signs up. So I can look at the board and see that, for example, one student is reading mentor text and she's starting to draft her word essay. Another student is also reading some mentor text, but is brainstorming some words for another project. Another student is drafting their abstract noun assignment. So they're just doing all different kinds of things, and they're doing the work that will help them get there. And, you know, we talk about commitment and how teachers, I as a teacher, what am I doing? I'm doing a lot of what Tiana said about the kid watching, the observation, the one-on-one conferencing, the conferencing that happens with, or not conferencing, the conferring that happens with kids in small groups, like whoever might need some support. Kids, you know, they sign, we put together a workshop pledge so that during this time, like we are really focused and are going to allow ourselves to find a way to get into the flow of writing during this time period and not going to be distracted by a million other things. And then every week they do that metacognitive reflection. What did I set out to learn at the beginning of this week? And then how did I do that? And then you can see with this reflection, they also attach artifacts to it that show the learning that they've done. So if they printed out like an essay from the New York Times or from the Atlantic and they annotated it for whatever skill that they knew they needed to work on, they would attach those annotations to this weekly reflection to show that they're like working on this particular skill that they think that they need some support in. And of course, I, as a teacher, need to give them some support and flexibility as well. So one of my things that I've been doing over the last couple of years has been creating sort of this slide deck of all sorts of mentor texts for them that are live out there in the world. So you can see everything is hyperlinked. And kids, you know, I give kids a lot of choice over what they want to write. They can really, I even say things, I stop saying things like bring in your introduction. I instead start saying things like bring in 250 words. They can be the first 250, but they can be the last 250. That, because writing is not linear, right? I think that idea of like writing in this linear manner, that's another way we've been colonized, socialized to write, but not all of our brains work that way, right? Sometimes you have the ending before you have the beginning. Sometimes you don't know how to introduce, right, you can't write an introduction for something you don't know what's about yet, right? So I think we don't allow writing to be exploratory. With that said, instead of, I do give kids lots of choice, but I also know that some kids will sit there because, again, I have high school students who, you know, have gone through a system and have been used to people telling them what to do. So when you say, now you have choice, they'll just sit there and they don't know where to go. So when I started compiling all these different possibilities, all these different possible writing things that they could do. And I, you know, as all good teachers do, they steal from different places. And just creating a slide deck and a resource that I put together, but also kids put together. They also give me suggestions, right? And you can't see it here, but you can kind of see how the slide deck works. And in many of these cases, some of the mentor texts that are in there are actually mentor texts from previous students. And I've found that the mentor texts from previous students have been some of the most powerful mentor texts for kids to write to.
100% agree
Yeah.
on that. Yeah.
Right? Tiana, you've seen that with your kids too.
Oh, all the time. And it's just, I mean, I have been using them more and more and more because they're just, it's so powerful. And it's also just the power of your peer, right?
Yeah.
That this isn't like something so far-fetched. It's an author that's famous or whatever. Like, this is an author that has existed in the spaces of this room, you know? So
yeah. I can't, like, it's so interesting because I will just share really quickly this one story. So I had this one essay a student wrote. She graduated. She's in college now, but she wrote this beautiful essay about, she's biracial, and she was writing this beautiful essay about having curly hair and like what that hair means and so on and so forth. It was really just about her identity as a biracial person through the lens or hair, right? And I gave it to students as a mentor text. And I remember one student this year said to me, well, I kind of want to write about my identity because he's also multiracial. He's like, but like, I know this student already wrote about it that way. And I don't want to feel like I'm like copying, or I don't want to feel like, you know, he was just hesitant about it because he had sort of felt that someone had already written about that. And what I said to him was that that's okay because it is, your story, right? And no one can write your story, even if it's about the same topic, right? Like if it's true to you, then it's true to who you are, and to embrace that opportunity. But I don't think he would have even thought to write about that part of his identity had he not seen how another student also did that, and then to make it his own.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
where that inspiration comes from.
So powerful for kids. All right. Now we're going to audience. Yes. So I have a lot here to say, I think, about audience, but Tiana's going to tell us a little bit about this cartoon.
Yeah, this little cartoon, how elementary kids reflect all the time. But when I was a Heinemann Fellow, during my research, I asked the kids the question, why do you write? And who do you write for? And a lot of them, when I first got them, said that I write for my teacher, or I write for the teacher. And I was like, oh, no. And just like working through to shift that perception. So writing can be for no one. It could be for themselves, or it can be for someone else. And I think this cartoon kind of like captured it a little bit there. So Trish is going to take over.
Yeah. So I think I'm just going to share a bit about how I really shifted audience for my students when I started doing student blogging. I'm always surprised how many people don't use blogging in the classroom, because I think blogging is like at least 10 years old now, because I think my first setup was like in 2007, right? And these are all the different reasons why student blogging has worked. Because some of my kids' writing that has been the most meaningful and most interesting has come from their blogs. And in that case, we set up like a blog like this. So this is what last year's looked like. And as you can see, it's just, it's a group blog. So every student I have across the section. So it means my third period and my eighth period and my fourth period are all in one blog. So then even if they're not in class together, they can see what other students in other classes are writing about. And just like I said before, like I do not give them many restrictions on topics. Like when we're thinking about content, like what's worth writing about? Do you care about it? Do you have something to say? Then you should write about it, is basically like the criteria. And do you think your peers will care about it? What do you have to say about the world or this issue? So students write all sorts of different things. As you can see, they write about issues that are out there in the world: gun control, equal pay, cover your webcam, list of contradictions, why Mrs. Zabarbi needs to stop lending me books. Like all these different topics here that that are meaningful to them. And you can see here's a student who wrote a whole post on just the things that she wanted to read for the summer. And look at the way that the writing here is multimedia as well, the pictures, the links. Sometimes students will do video blogging. And then, of course, the commenting. I mean, the most valuable thing about having a blog is that the audience is not me. Like they don't even, sometimes they forget that I'm even on the blog, like reading and commenting on their posts, because really they only care about what their peers think, right? I always say that there's kind of this mom rule when it comes to teaching. Like your mom is always supposed to love you, but your teachers have to love you, and your teachers love you no matter what, but your peers, it's a different story. And so these are just some of the topics. These are some of the sometimes we'll have challenges for different blog weeks. And then this is something that I also did, notice and appreciate. So I give kids an opportunity to give shout outs to each other so that they talk about the things that they love in each other's writing. And that again builds that community that's so important when you're thinking about how to write in the world, because writers in the world have communities, right? They have trusted friends that they go to. And and how can kids possibly know what that's like and how important that is in a writing life if we don't give them opportunities to develop those relationships in class?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Assessment.
We're gonna fly through this because we have like a couple of minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So assessment, stop grading everything. Students learn to write via volume, right? And if they only write what we can grade, they will never write enough to become better, period. And then students also need ongoing formative feedback. I think too much of the feedback that we give is summative and corrective. So we have to think about the ways in which we can give feedback that matters, which is feedback that happens during the process. Yeah. So really quickly, this is what my peer editing checklists used to look before. So before, this is what it looked like. This was like peer feedback, right? And it was basically all teacher directed. Basically, I was just teaching students how to think like the teacher and with a checklist of things that I created. And what was missing was student agency. And so now I've switched much more from advice-centered to response-centered. And what's really great about response-centered feedback is that students can have different responses. And so what ends up happening in their small peer response groups is that, student A may think that the writing is, may have one opinion, student B may be responding in another way. And then it's up to the student, the writer, to actually think about that feedback and then make a decision that works for them so that as an author, they have the authority to make the changes that they feel best represent what they actually want to say and fulfill their own purpose as a writer. So again, real readers respond to real writing, leaving the writer responsible for deciding what to do. So always going back to student agency. And with the blogging that I just shared a few minutes ago, kids do a lot of their own self-assessment. I mean, I find that students are actually much harder on themselves than I would be because they don't know how brilliant they are. They really don't sometimes. And so I just turn that over to them. Tiana, you want to talk about these?
Yeah, just real quick to kind of piggyback off of that, building a community of writers. I mean, this chart might look super familiar to elementary school teachers, but it's definitely throughout the process, and that students are getting it several times. And then at the end, when they are putting a piece into the world, that not only are they getting peer feedback, but they're using that same model for their self-reflection on where they're going next. And I think it's really important to say it's not just about in the feedback process, when you're questioning something, that I'm not just questioning something to question, but I really want students to lead their fellow writer to more work. How is that question leading to more work? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then this is just a digital format of it, just because there's some barriers in classrooms sometimes, and students can access feedback and engage in that community verbally and using pictures too. And this is just an app, Seesaw, that we've started to use more this year, and I really love it because it just, it creates more access points for students. Yeah. And then as we close out, we often ask students to reflect constantly, and it's really important for us to always engage in that constant reflection of what I teach, how I teach, and how I evaluate, just so that we can continue to disrupt writing workshop, so students are centered and students can present themselves authentically and their whole selves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important to always just do that check-in with ourselves. Yeah. So as we finish up on our last minute, here are some final takeaways. So we talked about 5 different areas that we can disrupt writing: genre, content, methods, audience, and assessment. And as you can see in all of these, we want to move from formulas to flexibility and freedom, from teacher chosen to student generated, from teacher directed to student led, from thinking about the audience of one, the teacher, to authentic audiences, and from summative correction in assessment to ongoing response. And I think Tiana will agree with me when I say that we flew through this, and you could take any single one of these and talk days about any single one. Right, Tiana?
Yeah, absolutely.
But we hope that today that even just getting sort of like a little peek into some of the things that we do might be helpful for anyone who might be watching or listening to start disrupting, even in small ways, the things that we're doing, so that we can turn over writing agency to the actual writers in our classrooms. Tiana, anything you want to add?
Nope. Just continue to disrupt and reach out to us if you have any questions. We're here for you.
Yes, thank you so much. I'll stop sharing our screen so people can see us. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I think we're still live.
I think we are live too.